Back again with you. I figured I would make sure I was about to leave school actually, and I was like, shoot, I never did that last um topic. So, topic four we'll do really quickly. We shouldn't take too long. Major turning point events that expanded voting rights for Americans. We did that timeline activity, and that showed the different events just to kind of look at when they happened and what was going on at the time, and then also just to define these. So these are the ones that you really need to know. I did forget to put the 26th Amendment in there, which gave voting rights to 18-year-olds. It's not going to directly be on the exam. I apologize for that omission, but that was um, 26th Amendment. That's basically 18-year-old vote. Um, so those are the turning point events, and over time, you've seen voting rights be um, expanded to various groups of people, especially people that have generally been marginalized in society. Like we started out in the 1800s, where what we call white universal manhood suffrage, where only white men basically are allowed to vote. And then eventually you have with the 15th Amendment, it says that African Americans can't be denied the vote based on their um, skin color, and also they add in other things like creed, national origin, things like that. 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote as well. You can't discriminate based on sex. 23rd Amendment gives voting rights or electoral college votes to Washington D.C., which is kind of a stupid one, but it allows them to be able to have a say in who the president is. 24th Amendment abolishes the poll tax, which is a poll tax is actually a technical term, but in this case, what they're talking about is a tax for purposes of voting. So you can't vote unless you pay a tax. So you can't charge people to be able to vote, basically. 26th Amendment gives 18-year-olds the right to vote, or puts the voting federal voting age at 18. States have to follow suit. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was part of the civil rights movement, and it was put in place to basically ensure that states were following the federal laws with voting, and gave the federal government more oversight. When we talk about the concept of federalism, gave the federal government more oversight in looking at how states were conducting their elections and whether or not they were being discriminatory. It also outlawed literacy tests for voting and things like that, because there's a lot of biased and discriminatory practices that were occurring, especially in the South. Part of that law was actually overturned by the Supreme Court in 2013. That was the part of the law that said that um, states the part of the law said that states, if they wanted to change their voting requirements, they had to go through a federal process and be approved by the federal government, and that was actually overturned by the Supreme Court. So now states do not have to go through that process when changing their voting laws, and that has, to an extent, led to some things like increased voter ID laws. Shortening voting hours, changing weekend voting times, things like that. So those are some things that have been put into place to in general limit access to voting, which has happened. But overall, throughout the course of U.S. history, you've seen democratic ideals expand to more and more people. Voter qualifications for Idaho, we didn't get into a ton on, but you have to be 18 years old. You have to be registered to vote. You have to show that you live or have lived in Idaho for 30 days um, prior to the election. And that's pretty much it. Then you're good to go. Idaho has a voter ID requirement, but they don't have a photo ID requirement like back in Wisconsin, where you had to show a photographed ID. You can show any ID that's accepted. They have like a list of different documents, but something that would be really, really unlikely that someone who's not you would have access to, like your bank statement or mortgage documents, social security card. Those are all things that don't have your picture on them, but it would be really hard for somebody to have access to that wasn't you. So most people just use their driver's license in general. So that's pretty much it in terms of voting rights. One big thing is make sure you go out and vote. Please, people, when you're eligible, when you're registered, go out and vote. It's not about whether or not your vote makes a difference in one election. It's about whether or not the government and the people in power represent the will of the majority. That's the big thing. So thank you. I'll leave you on that note. Have a nice night. Boom shakalaka.